The crystal tumbler slipped from my fingers and shattered against the marble floor. I stared at the spreading pool of whiskey, watching it seep into the grout lines like blood into cement. My hands were shaking. They hadn't shaken in 10 years. Not since the night I'd taken my father's place at the head of the Morelli family. The whiskey scent hit me then, not from the spilled drink, but from somewhere deep in my core. Alpha. That particular burn of aged scotch and oak and something darker. I'd been around alphas my whole life, but none of them smelled like him. Like power wrapped in expensive cologne. Like everything I wasn't supposed to want. I should clean that up before someone steps on the glass. The thought came automatically, the way all my thoughts did after a decade of service to this house. I was Julian Cruz. And cleaning up messes was what I did. I'd been doing it since I was 23, fresh off the boat from Barcelona with nothing but my grandfather's silver cross around my neck and a determination to survive that had carried me through borders, buses, and bureaucracy. Now I was 33, an unbonded omega working in a household of alphas and betas, and I still cleaned up messes. Just different kinds. I knelt carefully, my knees protesting against the cold floor as I began picking up the larger shards. The house was silent around me. That particular 3 a.m. silence that felt less like peace and more like held breath. Somewhere above me, in the east wing, Signora Morelli was probably asleep in her separate bedroom, dreaming whatever dreams unfaithful wives had. And Dante. I heard him before I saw him. The sound of something heavy hitting a wall made me freeze, a piece of glass still clutched in my palm. Then came his voice, rough and raw in a way I'd never heard it before, speaking Italian words I couldn't quite make out but whose meaning I understood in my bones. Rage. Betrayal. I abandoned the broken glass and moved toward the sound, my soft-soled shoes silent on the marble. The Grand Salado stretched before me, shadows pooling in corners despite the ambient lighting that was never fully extinguished in the Morelli mansion. Security measures. I'd learned that the family who controlled half of New York's underground couldn't afford complete darkness. I found him in the library. Dante Morelli sat on the floor with his back against his mahogany desk, legs stretched out, head tipped back against the wood. His jacket was gone, his white shirt untucked and stained with what looked like blood on his knuckles. An empty bottle of Macallan lay on its side next to him, and another still half full dangled from his fingers. The whiskey scent was overwhelming now, that distinctive alpha musk of aged scotch, oak, and something darker that had always made my omega instincts sit up and pay attention even when I tried to ignore them. He looked nothing like the man I'd served breakfast to that morning. That man had been pressed and perfect, his dark hair slicked back with precision, his gray suit fitted to his powerful frame like armor. His presence filling every room he entered with the kind of authority that made grown men nervous and others stupid. This man looked broken. "Signor," I said quietly, staying in the doorway. "Do you need 10 years?" His voice cut through my question like a knife through silk. 10 goddamn years, Julian. The use of my first name startled me. In a decade of service, he'd only ever called me Cruz. Or occasionally nothing at all, just a nod in my direction when he wanted something. The intimacy of my given name in his mouth, rough with whiskey and pain, made something in my chest tighten. I stepped into the room. "Signor, you're bleeding." He laughed, a sound without humor that made my skin prickle. "Am I?" "Hadn't noticed." He lifted the bottle to his lips and drank deeply, some of the whiskey spilling down his chin. "You know what I noticed, Julian? I noticed my wife fucking Marco Santini in our summer house." "Marco? The man I grew up with. The man who swore loyalty to my family when we were 15 years old." My breath caught. I'd suspected something was wrong when Signora Morelli had returned from the Hamptons early, her usual haughty composure cracked around the edges. I'd suspected further when Dante had come home 3 hours ago, dismissed all the guards except those on perimeter duty, and locked himself in this room. But hearing it confirmed, hearing the raw devastation in his voice, made it real in a way that turned my stomach. "I'm sorry," I said, because what else could I say? What words existed for this kind of betrayal? He tested the word, rolling it around in his mouth like the whiskey. "Everyone's going to be sorry. Marco's going to be very fucking sorry when He cut himself off, his jaw clenching so hard I could see the muscle jump. "You know what the worst part is?" I stayed silent, letting him talk. I'd learned early in my service to the Morellis that sometimes silence was the greatest gift you could give someone, space to fill with their own thoughts, their own pain. The worst part is that I should have seen it. The signs were all there. The late nights. The new perfume. The way she flinched when I touched her. He laughed again, that broken sound that made me want to gather him up like I would a wounded child. "I'm Dante fucking Morelli. I can read a room full of liars like a book. I can spot a double cross from a mile away. But my own wife. My own oldest friend. I was blind." The whiskey scent intensified as his emotion spiked, that alpha pheromone of rage and grief and humiliation that made my omega hindbrain want to either submit or flee. I did neither. I stayed rooted to the spot, watching him fall apart. He tried to stand then, using the desk for leverage, but his legs gave out halfway up. I was moving before I thought about it, crossing the room in quick strides to catch him before he fell. My hands gripped his arms, feeling the solid muscle beneath the expensive cotton, the heat of him seeping through the fabric. His scent hit me full force now, that intoxicating mix of whiskey and power and something purely, devastatingly alpha. My omega instincts purred in response even as my rational mind screamed warnings. "Easy," I murmured, steadying him. "Let me help you." He looked down at me, and for the first time in 10 years, really looked at me. His eyes were the color of dark amber in the low light, bloodshot and unfocused, but still sharp enough to make me feel seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly thrilling. "You're always here," he said, his voice slurring slightly. "Every morning. Every night. 10 years. And you're always here. Why?" "It's my job," I said simply, though the words felt inadequate even as I spoke them. "Your job." He seemed to consider this, swaying slightly despite my grip on him. "Do you have a husband, Julian? A boyfriend? Someone waiting for you in whatever small room you go home to at night?" The questions were invasive, inappropriate. But I answered anyway. "No, Signor. No one." "Why not? Pretty omega like you. You should have someone." The compliment, casual and alcohol-soaked as it was, sent warmth spreading through my chest that I immediately tried to suppress. This was not the time. He was not himself. And I was not a foolish omega who mistook a drunk alpha's rambling for genuine interest. "I have my work," I said, guiding him toward the door. "And right now, my work is getting you upstairs before you hurt yourself." He let me lead him, his weight heavy against my side, his arm draped over my shoulders in a way that made me hyper-aware of every point of contact between us. We moved through the silent house slowly, his feet occasionally catching on nothing, his breathing heavy and uneven. His scent wrapped around me like a physical presence, and I could feel my own pheromones responding, that soft milk and honey undertone that marked me as an unbonded omega. "She said she loved him," he mumbled as we reached the stairs. "Said she'd loved him for years. Years, Julian. While I was out there building an empire, protecting this family, she was," his voice broke, and I felt him shudder against me. "Don't think about it now," I said softly, helping him up the first step. "One step at a time. We climbed slowly, the grand staircase that usually echoed with footsteps now muffling our ascent. The paintings of Morelli ancestors watched us pass with their stern painted eyes, judging, or perhaps simply observing, this latest chapter in their family's complicated history. By the time we reached his bedroom, the master suite in the west wing far from where his wife slept, Dante was barely conscious. I'd been in this room countless times to clean, to change linens, to ensure everything was perfect for the man who demanded perfection in all things. But I'd never been here like this, with him leaning on me, trusting me to get him to safety. I guided him to the bed, easing him down onto the mattress. He caught my wrist before I could step back, his fingers wrapping around my arm with surprising strength for someone so intoxicated. "Stay," he said, the word barely above a whisper. "Just, don't leave me alone right now." Every professional instinct I had screamed that this was wrong. That I should call his personal assistant, his brother, anyone but remain here in his bedroom in the middle of the night. But the raw vulnerability in his voice, the desperate grip on my wrist, the way he looked at me like I was the only solid thing in a world that had just shattered around him, it all conspired to keep me frozen in place. "I'll stay until you fall asleep," I heard myself say. He nodded, his eyes already drifting closed, and released my wrist. I should have left then. Should have backed away and returned to my own quarters in the staff wing. Instead, I found myself moving around the room, removing his shoes, loosening his tie, covering him with the cashmere throw from the foot of the bed. His shirt was ruined, the blood on his knuckles dried now but still stark against the white fabric. I went to his bathroom, found the first aid kit I knew was kept under the sink, and returned with antiseptic and bandages. "This might sting," I warned, taking his hand in mine. He didn't flinch as I cleaned the wounds, just watched me with those amber eyes that seemed to see more than they should. His knuckles were split, probably from hitting something, or someone. I worked carefully, my fingers gentle as I applied the antiseptic and wrapped the bandages, trying to ignore the way my heart was racing. "You have kind hands," he said suddenly. "I never noticed before." "You've never needed to notice before, Signor." "Dante." The name came out rough, almost pleading. "Call me Dante. At least tonight. At least when it's just us and everything else is broken." I looked up at him, at this man who'd been my employer for a decade, who I'd served without question, who I'd watched from a distance as he built his empire and commanded respect and fear in equal measure. This man who was now asking me to see him not as Signor Morelli, but simply as Dante. "Dante," I repeated softly, testing the name on my tongue. He smiled, a real smile that transformed his face from harsh angles to something almost boyish. Then his eyes closed again, his breathing deepening as the alcohol finally pulled him under. "I should have left. I meant to leave." But as I stood to go, he stirred, reaching out blindly, and I found myself sitting on the edge of the bed instead. Just for a moment, I told myself. Just until I was sure he was fully asleep. The moment stretched into minutes, and the minutes into an hour. I watched him sleep, this powerful alpha brought low by betrayal, and something in my chest cracked open. Some wall I'd built around myself during 10 years of service, 10 years of being invisible, 10 years of keeping my distance from the life and the man I served. I knew his routines better than I knew my own. I knew he took his coffee black with 1 sugar, that he read the financial section of the Times every morning, that he worked out at 5 a.m. without fail. I knew he preferred his shirts pressed with light starch, that he had a scar on his left shoulder from a bullet he'd taken when he was 25, that he was left-handed but trained himself to shoot with his right. I knew he called his mother every Sunday no matter where he was in the world. I knew these things because it was my job to know them. But somewhere along the way, the knowing had become something more. Somewhere in the careful attention to his preferences, the anticipation of his needs, the quiet witnessing of his life, I had done the unforgivable thing. I had fallen in love with Dante Morelli. The realization should have terrified me. Instead, sitting there in the pre-dawn darkness, watching him sleep with his defenses finally down, I felt something like peace settle over me. I woke to the sensation of warmth and the smell of expensive cologne mixed with whiskey and alpha musk. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was, my mind foggy with the kind of deep sleep that came after emotional exhaustion. Then I felt the weight against my side, and everything came rushing back. Dante. Sometime during the night, I'd laid down beside him. Not under the covers, I wasn't that foolish, but on top of them, my body curved toward his, my hand resting on his chest as if to assure myself he was still breathing. His shirt, blood-stained and wrinkled, had somehow ended up on me, pulled over my uniform like a blanket. The fabric was saturated with his scent, that rich, dark whiskey smell that made my omega instincts purr with contentment. Dawn light filtered through the heavy curtains, painting everything in shades of gray and gold. I should move. I should leave before he woke and found me here, in his bed, wearing his shirt like some kind of claim. But I didn't move. Instead, I found myself studying his face in the growing light. In sleep, the harsh lines of command softened, revealing the man beneath the myth. There was a small scar above his right eyebrow that I'd never noticed before, barely visible unless you were this close. His eyelashes were longer than they had any right to be, dark against his olive skin. His jaw, usually set with determination, was relaxed now, almost vulnerable. My grandfather used to say that you could tell a person's true nature by how they looked when they slept. Los sueños no mienten, he'd whisper. Dreams don't lie. In sleep, he believed, the soul showed itself without the masks we wore during waking hours. I wondered what Dante's soul looked like. What dreams, or nightmares, played behind his closed eyes. My hand moved slightly on his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heartbeat beneath my palm. Strong. Steady. Alive. Despite everything he'd endured, everything he'd done, everything he'd built and destroyed, his heart kept beating with the same relentless rhythm as any other man's. I stayed because you never allowed anyone to take care of you, I whispered, so quietly that I barely heard my own voice. But I always wanted to. His breathing changed. My entire body went rigid as I realized he was awake. Had probably been awake. Had definitely heard what I just said. Panic flooded through me, hot and immediate. I should move. Should apologize. Should. Julian. My name on his lips stopped me cold. His eyes opened slowly, focusing on me with a clarity that shouldn't have been possible after the amount of alcohol he'd consumed. Say that again. My mouth went dry. Signor, Dante, he corrected, his voice rough with sleep but firm. And I want to hear you say it again. What you just said. Heat crept up my neck, burning my cheeks. I shouldn't have said anything. It was inappropriate. I'll go. His hand caught mine before I could pull away, pressing my palm flat against his chest where his heart beat faster now, no longer steady but racing. Say it again. The command in his voice, not harsh, but absolute, made something in me unfurl. I stayed because you never let anyone take care of you, I repeated, meeting his eyes even as my voice shook. But I always wanted to. The silence that followed felt dense, heavy with implications I didn't dare examine. His thumb traced small circles on the back of my hand, and I realized with a start that he was still holding it against his chest, that his shirt was still draped over my shoulders, that we were lying in his bed together as dawn broke over New York City. 10 years, he said finally, his voice carrying a note of wonder. You've been here 10 years, and I never saw you. You weren't supposed to see me, I replied. That's what good service is, being there without being noticed. Fuck good service. The vulgarity, so at odds with his usual careful control, startled a small laugh from me. His eyes lit up at the sound. That's the first time I've heard you laugh. I laugh plenty, Signor. Dante. Not around me, he continued. Never around me. He shifted slightly, propping himself up on one elbow so he could look down at me. The movement made his shirt slip off my shoulder, and his gaze followed it, tracking the exposed skin like he was seeing me for the first time. Why did you stay last night? You asked me to. That's not why. His eyes returned to mine, searching. You could have left the moment I fell asleep. But you didn't. You stayed. You put on my shirt. You lay down next to me like, he trailed off, seeming to struggle with the words. Like I cared what happened to you, I finished quietly. Because I do. The admission hung between us, naked and vulnerable. I waited for him to pull away, to remember who we were, employer and employee, Don Morelli and his Omega Maid, to put back all the barriers that should exist between us. Instead, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my cheek. Why? He asked. Why do you care? I tried to keep my voice steady. Because in 10 years, I've watched you carry the weight of an entire empire on your shoulders. I've seen you make impossible decisions, protect people who don't deserve your protection, sacrifice your own happiness for your family's sake. I've seen you at your worst and your best, and, I took a shaky breath. I've never seen anyone take care of you. Not once. His jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought I'd said too much. Then he laughed, low and rough. You sound like you're describing someone else. A better man. I'm describing the man I've served for 10 years. The one who remembers every staff member's birthday. Who paid for Rosa's son's surgery without being asked. Who makes sure the guards' families are taken care of when they're injured on the job. I shifted slightly, feeling the weight of his gaze. The man who's been bleeding from his knuckles for 12 hours and hasn't complained once. He glanced down at his bandaged hand, flexing it experimentally. You did this. You were hurt. I've been hurt before. You never offered to bandage me then. I met his eyes. You never let me see you hurt before. The truth of that statement settled over us. In 10 years, I'd never seen Dante Morelli show weakness. Never seen him anything but perfectly composed, perfectly controlled. Last night had been an aberration, a crack in the armor that he'd now have to decide whether to repair or leave open. What did you see? He asked suddenly. Last night, when you found me. What did you see? I considered lying, softening the truth. But something in his eyes told me he needed honesty more than comfort. I saw a man who'd been betrayed by the two people he trusted most. I saw someone in pain, trying to numb it with alcohol. I hesitated, then continued. I saw someone who needed not to be alone. He was quiet for a long moment, his thumb still tracing those small circles on my hand. You know what I saw this morning? What? I saw the Omega who's been invisible for 10 years suddenly becoming the only thing I could see clearly. His eyes held mine, intense and unwavering. I woke up and found you here, in my shirt, touching me like I mattered. And for the first time since I found Bianca with Marco, I felt something other than rage and betrayal. My heart stuttered. What did you feel? Dante. The word came out raw. I felt seen, Julian. Really seen. In a way that, he cut himself off, pulling back slightly as if remembering himself. This is inappropriate. Yes, I agreed, but I didn't move to leave. You work for me. Yes. I'm married. Technically. I know. I'm not a good man, Julian. The things I've done, the things I'll have to do. I know. I interrupted softly. I've cleaned your study after meetings. I've seen the fear in people's eyes when they come to the house. I've heard the late-night phone calls, seen the blood on your clothes that wasn't yours. I know exactly who you are, Dante Morelli. He stared at me, something like shock crossing his features. And you stayed anyway. I stayed because of who you are. Not despite it. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with meaning. I watched understanding dawn in his eyes, watched him process what I was saying, that I'd seen his darkness and hadn't run, that I knew his demons and hadn't tried to exorcise them, that I accepted him as he was rather than as I wished he'd be. You're going to ruin me, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Or save you. I gave him a small smile. Same thing. A knock at the door shattered the moment. We both froze as a familiar voice called through the heavy wood. Dante? Are you awake? We need to talk about Marco. Luca. Dante's younger brother and consigliere, his second-in-command in all things that mattered. Dante's entire demeanor changed in an instant, the vulnerability evaporating as he shifted back into his role. But before he could move away completely, he brought my hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to my palm, his eyes never leaving mine. This conversation isn't over, he said quietly. Then, louder, give me 5 minutes, Luca. I slipped from the bed, removing his shirt with shaking hands and straightening my uniform. The cotton still smelled like him, cologne and whiskey and alpha musk, and something uniquely Dante. I folded it carefully, laying it on the chair by the window. When I turned back, he was standing, running his hands through his hair, transforming back into Don Morelli before my eyes. But as I moved toward the door, he caught my wrist one more time. Julian. I looked back at him. Thank you. For last night. He seemed to search for words. For seeing me. I nodded, not trusting my voice, and slipped out into the hallway just as Luca appeared at the top of the stairs. He gave me a curious look as we passed, but I kept my eyes down, falling back into my role as the invisible Omega Maid who saw everything and said nothing. But as I descended the stairs, I could still feel the ghost of Dante's lips on my palm. Still hear his voice saying my name like a prayer. Still see the way he'd looked at me in the dawn light like I was something precious he'd just discovered. Everything had changed. The house felt different after that morning. Or maybe I felt different. It was hard to tell where the change originated, whether the Morelli mansion had somehow shifted on its foundation, or whether I was simply seeing it through new eyes, now that those eyes had witnessed Dante Morelli at his most vulnerable. I went about my duties with mechanical precision, the routines I'd perfected over 10 years providing a familiar framework even as my internal world tilted off its axis. I supervised the morning cleaning, checked the inventory, coordinated with the chef about dinner, all while my mind replayed those moments in Dante's bedroom on an endless loop. You're doing it again. I blinked, focusing on Rosa, the cook who'd become something close to a friend in my years here. He was watching me with knowing eyes as I stood at the kitchen counter, having apparently been stirring the same cup of coffee for the past 5 minutes. Doing what? I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. That thing where you're here but not here. He wiped his hands on his apron and came to stand beside me. What's going on? You've been distracted all day. It's nothing. The lie tasted bitter on my tongue. Rosa snorted. I've known you for 8 years, Julian. You don't do distracted unless something major has happened. He lowered his voice. Does this have anything to do with what happened last night? With Bianca and Marco? Of course he knew. Everyone knew by now. News traveled fast in a household of this size, even when the staff tried to maintain discretion. By noon, every member of the house staff had been aware that Bianca Morelli would be moving out immediately, that Marco Santini was no longer welcome on Morelli property, and that the Don's mood was, in Rosa's delicate phrasing, darker than usual. "I found him last night," I heard myself say after everyone else had been dismissed. "He was in the library." And he was. I struggled to find words that wouldn't betray the intimacy of those moments. "He was hurt." Rosa's expression softened with understanding. "And you took care of him?" It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. "Oh, Julian." He said my name with a mixture of sympathy and concern. "Be careful." "I am being careful." "No, you're not. I can see it in your eyes. That look." He touched my arm gently. "I had that look once, years ago before I came to work here, for an alpha who was wrong for me in every way that mattered." "This isn't like that," I protested, even though I wasn't sure it was true. "Isn't it? He's your employer, Julian. And not just any employer. He's Dante Morelli. The alpha who runs half the city's underworld. The alpha whose wife just betrayed him with his oldest friend. The alpha who's about to go to war over that betrayal." He squeezed my arm. "Anyone near him when he does is going to get caught in the crossfire." Everything he said was true. I knew it was true. But knowing and feeling were two different things, and right now my feelings were a tangled mess of concern, desire, and something deeper that I was afraid to name. "I can't help how I feel," I said quietly. "Maybe not. But you can help what you do about it." Rosa squeezed my arm before returning to his prep work. "Just remember, alphas like that, they don't love the same way we do. They possess. They own. They consume. And when they're done, there's nothing left but ash." His words stayed with me as I continued my rounds through the house, past the grand salotto where Bianca's portrait still hung above the fireplace, soon to be removed, I'd heard, past the dining room where the Morelli family had shared countless meals, past Dante's study where I could hear male voices and heated discussion behind the closed door. I paused outside the study, my hand hovering over the knob. I had a legitimate reason to enter. It was time for the afternoon refreshments, something I brought without fail every day at 3 o'clock. But today felt different. Today, entering that room felt like crossing a threshold I couldn't uncross. I knocked softly and waited for permission to enter. "Come." Dante's voice, sharp and commanding. Nothing like the raw vulnerability I'd heard hours ago. I pushed open the door to find him seated behind his massive desk, Luca standing by the window, and 3 other men I recognized as high-ranking members of the family spread throughout the room. The conversation stopped the moment I entered. 5 sets of eyes turned toward me, but I only felt one, Dante's gaze tracking my movement across the room with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Excuse the interruption, signori," I said, keeping my voice professionally neutral as I set the tray on the side table. "Your afternoon refreshments." "Thank you, Cruz." The use of my surname felt like a deliberate choice, a way of maintaining distance in front of his men. I nodded and turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. "One moment." I turned back, waiting. He stood, moving from behind the desk with that fluid grace that always made me think of predators, beautiful and dangerous in equal measure. He approached the tray, ostensibly to examine the refreshments, but as he passed me, his hand brushed against mine, so briefly that anyone watching might have thought it accidental. But I knew better. The touch was deliberate, a secret communication in a room full of alphas who couldn't know what had passed between us. "Perfect as always," he said, his voice carrying a note that made me think he wasn't just talking about the food. I allowed myself one quick glance at his face and immediately regretted it. The way he was looking at me, like I was something he wanted to devour, made heat flood my cheeks. I could feel my own pheromones responding, that soft milk and honey scent that I'd always been able to suppress before. Now it was leaking through, barely perceptible but there, a betrayal of everything I was trying to hide. "Will there be anything else, Senior?" "Not right now." He picked up a small sandwich, his bandaged hand drawing my attention. "But I'll need to speak with you later about the household arrangements, now that there will be changes." The pause before changes felt weighted with significance. The other men in the room shifted, uncomfortable with the domestic topic, eager to return to whatever strategy they'd been discussing. I nodded and slipped from the room, my heart racing. The brief touch. The loaded words. The way he'd looked at me. It was all confirmation that last night hadn't been an aberration, hadn't been just the alcohol talking. Something had fundamentally shifted between us, and neither of us knew how to navigate this new territory. The rest of the afternoon passed in a haze of routine tasks performed by muscle memory while my mind remained fixed on those few seconds in the study. I found myself touching the spot on my hand where his fingers had brushed, as if I could still feel the heat of him. It was dangerous. Rosa was right about that. Everything about this was dangerous, the timing, the circumstances, the power imbalance, the world he inhabited. A world where betrayal was met with violence, where loyalty was currency, and where someone like me had no protection beyond Dante's goodwill. But I'd spent 10 years being invisible. Being safe. Being smart. And where had it gotten me? To a small room in the staff wing, alone every night, watching life pass by from the margins. Maybe it was time to step into the light. Consequences be damned. That evening, as the house settled into its nighttime rhythm, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written on expensive cardstock in Dante's distinctive handwriting, all sharp angles and controlled precision. Library. Midnight. D. My hands trembled as I read the 2 words over and over. This was a line we were about to cross, both of us going in with our eyes open. I could ignore the note, pretend I never received it, continue on with my life as if nothing had changed. But I knew I wouldn't. At 11:45, I changed out of my uniform into the simple black trousers and button-down shirt I wore on my rare days off. I brushed my hair, leaving it down instead of in its usual practical style. I touched my grandfather's cross at my throat, drawing strength from the familiar weight of silver. "Forgive me, abuelo," I whispered. "But I have to know." The house was quiet as I made my way downstairs. Most of the staff had already retired to their quarters. Only the night guards remained, and they were stationed outside, protecting the perimeter rather than monitoring the interior. The library door was ajar, soft light spilling into the hallway. I pushed it open slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dante stood by the window, his back to me, hands in his pockets as he stared out at the darkened grounds. He'd changed from his business suit into dark slacks and a white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to expose his forearms. Without his jacket, he looked less like a mob boss and more like what he might have been in another life. Just a man. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said without turning around. "I almost didn't." "What changed your mind?" I moved into the room, closing the door behind me with a soft click. "Honestly, I'm tired of being invisible." That made him turn. His eyes traveled over me, taking in the trousers, the loose hair, the way I held myself, not as his employee but as an Omega who knew exactly what he wanted. "You've never been invisible to me." "Not after last night." "Before last night, then." "For 10 years. He had the grace to look slightly guilty. "Before last night, I was a fool. I'm trying not to be one anymore." We stood there, 10 feet apart, the desk between us like a physical manifestation of all the barriers that still existed, social class, power dynamics, his complicated marital situation, the dangerous world he inhabited. All of it hung in the air, unspoken but heavy. What did you want to talk about? I asked, even though I suspected we both knew this conversation wouldn't be just about household arrangements. You, he said simply. I want to know who Julian Cruz really is. Not my maid. Not the Omega who's served my family for 10 years. The man beneath all that. The one who stayed with me last night when he had every reason to leave. The request was so unexpected, so personal, that I found myself momentarily speechless. In 10 years, no one in this house had asked me about myself. I was Cruz, the reliable Omega maid who showed up on time, did his job without complaint, and disappeared into the background when not needed. But Dante was asking me to be more than that. He was asking me to be seen. I don't know where to start, I admitted, my hands clasped in front of me to keep them from shaking. Start at the beginning. Dante moved around the desk, leaning against it with his arms crossed over his chest. The posture was casual, but his eyes remained intense, focused entirely on me. Where are you from? How did you end up here? I took a breath, steadying myself. Barcelona. I grew up in a small apartment in the Gothic Quarter with my grandfather. My parents died when I was young, a car accident. So it was just Abuelo and me. He raised you. He raised me. I touched the cross at my throat. He was a tailor, worked from home making custom suits for wealthy men. I used to sit and watch him work for hours, the way his hands moved with such precision and care. He taught me that there was dignity in service, that making someone's life beautiful, even in small ways, was worth doing. Is that why you became a maid? I laughed softly. No. I became a maid because I needed money, and it was the only job available when I first came to America. But I stayed a maid because of what Abuelo taught me, that there's value in doing something well, even if others don't notice. Dante was quiet for a moment, processing this. What brought you to America? This was the part one rarely spoke about, the wound that had driven me across an ocean. A man. Not like that. I saw his expression shift slightly, something like jealousy flickering in his eyes. My grandfather got sick. Cancer. The treatment was expensive, more than we could afford. A man I'd known growing up, someone I trusted, he offered to help. He said he had connections in America, that he could get me a job that paid well enough to send money back for Abuelo's treatment. But there was a catch. There's always a catch. I moved to the window, needing to look at something other than Dante's intense gaze. When I got here, I found out the job he'd arranged was not what he'd promised. He wanted me to work in one of his clubs. Not as a waiter. I felt more than saw Dante's body tense, heard the dangerous edge enter his voice. Did he? No. I interrupted quickly. I got away before I ran. I had enough money for a few days in a cheap hotel while I looked for real work. That's when I saw the ad for a housemaid position at the Morelli estate. I applied. Mrs. Morelli hired me on the spot. And I've been here ever since. What happened to your grandfather? The familiar ache squeezed my chest. He died 3 months after I got here. By the time I'd saved enough to pay for treatment, it was too late. The cancer had spread. Dante pushed off from the desk, closing the distance between us. I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. That doesn't make it hurt less. The understanding in his voice, the empathy, surprised me. This was not the cold, calculating alpha mob boss I'd watched from a distance for years. This was someone who knew pain, who recognized it in others. What about the alpha who lied to you? Dante asked quietly. The one who tried to, he couldn't seem to finish the sentence. I don't know. I never saw him again after I ran. I assume he moved on to easier targets. Something dark crossed Dante's face, and I realized with a start that he was angry on my behalf. What was his name? It doesn't matter. It matters to me. His hand came up to cup my cheek, the touch gentle despite the fury in his eyes. You were 23. Alone in a foreign country. Vulnerable. He tried to use that vulnerability. So yes, his name matters. I should have been frightened by the violence implicit in his words, the promise of retribution. Instead, I felt something warm unfurl in my chest, the feeling of being protected, valued, defended. Javier Ruiz, I whispered. Dante nodded once, committing the name to memory. And I knew without asking that Javier Ruiz's life was about to become very complicated. I should have felt guilty about that. I didn't. Your turn, I said, needing to shift the focus. You know my story now. Tell me yours. He dropped his hand from my face but didn't step back. You've worked here for 10 years. You already know my story. I know the public version. The Don who took over the family business when his father died. The Alpha who expanded the empire, modernized the operations, became one of the most powerful figures in New York. But I don't know the private version. The Alpha who stays up until 3 a.m. reading in this library. The Alpha who calls his mother every Sunday without fail. The Alpha who, I hesitated, then continued, married Bianca Rossi. His jaw tightened at the mention of his soon-to-be ex-wife. That's not a story I'm proud of. I'm not asking you to be proud of it. I'm asking you to tell me. To let me see you the way you saw me last night. We stood there, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could count the different shades of amber in his eyes. This moment felt significant, like we were standing on the edge of something that would either destroy us or transform us. I married her because it made sense, he said finally. A union between the Morelli and Rossi families. Strong alliances. Shared territories. My father arranged it before he died, and I honored his wishes. His laugh was bitter. I told myself that love would come eventually. That it didn't matter if I didn't feel passion for her, because we respected each other and that was enough for a successful partnership. But it wasn't. No. We were business partners who shared a last name and occasionally a bed. Nothing more. I worked 18-hour days. She ran her social circles. And we both pretended that was enough. He paused. When I found her with Marco, I wasn't just angry about the betrayal. I was angry because I realized I'd wasted 10 years of my life on something hollow. I'd built an empire but forgotten to build a life. The vulnerability in his admission made my chest ache. What do you want now? If you could have anything, what would you choose? You really want to know? I nodded. He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, his fingers lingering against my skin. I want someone who sees past the empire to the man. Someone who doesn't want to change me or fix me or turn me into something I'm not. Someone who knows what I am and stays anyway. His other hand came up to frame my face, his thumbs brushing my cheekbones. Last night, when I woke up and found you there, in my shirt, touching me like I mattered, that was the first time in 10 years I felt like someone actually saw me. Really saw me. And it terrifies me because you're the one person I shouldn't want, but you're the only person I can't stop thinking about. My breath caught. I'm your employee. I know. This is completely inappropriate. I know that too. If anyone found out. I know all of that, Julian. I know every reason why this is a terrible idea. I've been listing them to myself for the past 12 hours. His forehead came to rest against mine, and I could feel his breath against my lips. But I can't seem to make myself care. Neither could I. That was the terrifying truth. All the logical objections, all the potential consequences, all the very real dangers, none of it seemed to matter when he was this close, when he was looking at me like I was something precious he'd been searching for without knowing it. What happens now? I whispered. That depends on you. His hands remained gentle on my face, giving me the power to pull away if I wanted. I won't force this. I won't use my position to pressure you. If you walk out of here right now and tell me to forget this conversation ever happened, I'll respect that. And if I don't walk away? His eyes darkened. Then everything changes. I thought about Rosa's warnings about the dangers of getting close to an alpha like Dante Morelli. I thought about the life I'd built in the margins, safe and invisible. I thought about all the reasons I should step back, maintain my distance, protect myself. Then I thought about the way he'd looked at me in the dawn light. The way his lips had felt against my palm. The way I'd felt seen for the first time in 10 years. I've spent a decade being careful, I said. Being smart. Being safe. And where has it gotten me? To a small room, alone every night, watching other people live their lives. I took a shaky breath. I'm tired of being invisible, Dante. I'm tired of playing it safe. I'm tired of watching from the sidelines. So if everything's going to change anyway, then maybe it should. The kiss, when it came, wasn't gentle. It was desperate, hungry, years of unspoken tension finally finding release. His hands slid into my hair, holding me to him as if afraid I might disappear. My own hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, wanting to eliminate every inch of space between us. His alpha scent flooded my senses, that intoxicating whiskey and power and something darker, and I felt my own pheromones responding, that soft milk and honey scent rising to meet his. We broke apart only when breathing became necessary, both of us trembling, foreheads still pressed together. This is going to be complicated, he murmured against my lips. I know. Dangerous. I know that too. You could get hurt. I pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. I've been getting hurt quietly for 10 years, Dante. At least this way, I'll be hurt while truly living. Something fierce and possessive flared in his eyes. No one is going to hurt you. Not while I'm breathing. Not even you. The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was quiet for a long moment before answering. I can't promise I won't hurt you. I can only promise that I'll never do it deliberately. And that I'll spend every day trying to be worth the risk you're taking on me. It wasn't a romantic declaration. It wasn't poetry or promises of forever. But it was honest, and honesty was more valuable than pretty words. Then I guess we're doing this, I said. I guess we are. He kissed me again, slower this time, savoring rather than devouring. As his arms came around me, pulling me against the solid warmth of his body, I felt something settle in my chest. This might be reckless. This might be dangerous. This might end in disaster. But for the first time in 10 years, I felt truly alive. The next 3 days passed in a strange duality. During daylight hours, I remained Cruz, the efficient Omega maid who moved through the Morelli household with professional detachment. I supervised staff, managed household needs, maintained the routines I'd perfected over a decade of service. No one would have suspected anything had changed. But once darkness fell and the house settled into its nighttime rhythm, I became Julian, the Omega who slipped into Dante's private study, his library, once even the wine cellar, wherever we could steal precious moments together away from watching eyes. We were careful. Painfully, meticulously careful. Dante had enemies who would use any perceived weakness against him, and I had no illusions about what I would become if our relationship became public knowledge, a liability, a target, a way to hurt him. Still, The secrecy added a particular intensity to every stolen touch, every whispered conversation. We were two people existing in the margins between his world and mine, creating something new in the shadows. On the fourth night, I found him waiting in the library again, but this time he wasn't alone. "Julian, come in," Dante said, standing as I entered. "I want you to meet someone." The man who'd been seated across from Dante rose as well. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and kind eyes that assessed me with surprising warmth. He wore an expensive suit that spoke of money, but his smile was genuine, lacking the calculation I'd come to associate with Dante's business associates. "This is Anthony Marchetti," Dante continued. "My family's attorney for the past 30 years. Tony, this is Julian Cruz." I offered my hand, confused about why I was being introduced to Dante's lawyer. "Signor Marchetti. Please, call me Tony." His handshake was firm, respectful. "Dante has told me a great deal about you." My eyes flew to Dante, alarm flooding through me. "We'd agreed to be discreet, to tell no one." "Tony knows everything," Dante said, reading my expression. "And he's here to help ensure you're protected." "Protected from what?" Tony gestured for me to sit. Once I was settled, he opened a folder on the table before him. "From the complications that tend to arise when someone becomes important to an alpha in Dante's position." He paused. "I understand the two of you have developed a personal relationship." Heat crept up my neck, but I forced myself to answer honestly. "Yes." "Good. Then we need to discuss some practicalities." Tony pulled out several documents. "First, your current employment status. Right now, you work directly for the Morelli household. That creates certain legal complications if the relationship becomes public, claims of harassment, abusive power dynamics, that sort of thing. We're going to restructure your position." I looked at Dante, bewildered. "I don't understand." "You're being promoted," Dante said, a slight smile playing at his lips. "You're no longer the head housekeeper. As of tomorrow, you'll be the household manager for all Morelli properties, the primary residence, the summer house, the apartment in the city. It's a legitimate executive position with a salary to match, complete independence in hiring and managing staff, and most importantly, it reports directly to Tony's office rather than to me personally. That way," Tony continued, "if anyone questions the relationship, we can demonstrate clear professional separation. You have your own authority structure, your own budget, your own domain. Dante cannot fire you, cannot punish you professionally, cannot leverage his position over you in any way." My head was spinning. "But why?" "Because I won't have anyone suggesting you're with me because you have no choice." Dante's voice was firm. "This relationship, whatever it becomes, has to be your choice. Freely made. Without any professional pressure or economic coercion." I stared at him, overwhelmed by the lengths he was going to in order to protect me, to give me power in a situation where I had none. "There's more," Tony said gently. "We need to discuss living arrangements." "Living arrangements?" "You currently reside in the staff wing," Dante said. "That needs to change. We're converting the East Wing apartment, the one Bianca used to occupy, into an independent residence for you. Separate entrance, separate security, your own space. You'll still be on the property, but you'll have complete privacy and autonomy." "Dante, this is too much." "It's not enough." He interrupted. "Julian, listen to me. My world is dangerous. The people in it are dangerous. If we're going to do this, you need to be protected in every possible way, legally, financially, physically. This isn't about control. It's about ensuring that if something happens to me, you're not left vulnerable." The reminder of the constant threat hanging over his life made my chest tighten. Nothing's going to happen to you. His smile was sad, knowing. We don't get to make that guarantee. But I can guarantee that you'll be taken care of regardless. Tony cleared his throat diplomatically. There's also the matter of a trust fund being established in your name, independent of Dante, managed by neutral trustees. Enough to ensure you never have to work again if you choose not to. No. The word came out sharper than I intended. Absolutely not. I don't want your money, Dante. This isn't about what you want, he said, his tone brooking no argument. It's about what you need. What you deserve. You've served my family for 10 years with nothing but a modest salary and a room in the staff quarters. Let me do this. People will talk. They'll say I'm a gold digger, that I seduced you for money. Let them. Dante leaned forward, his eyes intense. I don't care what people say. I care about your safety and security. That's all that matters. We argued for another 20 minutes, but ultimately I knew I'd lost. When Dante made up his mind about something, especially something involving my protection, he was immovable. By the time Tony left, I'd signed more documents than I could count, agreeing to arrangements that fundamentally altered my position in the Morelli household. Once we were alone, I turned to Dante, still processing everything. You didn't have to do all this. Yes, I did. He pulled me into his arms, and I went willingly, resting my head against his chest where I could hear his heartbeat. I meant what I said that first night. I protect what's mine. I'm not yours yet, I murmured, even as I melted into his embrace. Aren't you? His hand came up to tilt my chin, forcing me to meet his eyes. I think you've been mine since the moment you lay down beside me wearing my shirt. I just didn't know it yet. The kiss he gave me then was slow, thorough, a claiming that had nothing to do with ownership and everything to do with devotion. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. Stay with me tonight, he whispered. Not in secret. Not stolen moments. Stay with me properly. The invitation hung in the air between us, heavy with implications. This would be crossing another line, taking another step away from what we'd been toward what we might become. Your wife is gone. Moved out 3 days ago. The divorce papers are being filed tomorrow. His hands framed my face. I'm a free alpha, Julian. Or at least I will be once the legalities are settled. And I don't want to waste another minute pretending I don't want you beside me. I thought about Rosa's warnings about the dangers of loving an alpha like Dante. But I also thought about the way he'd protected me, supported me, seen me in ways no one else ever had. Okay, I whispered. I'll stay. The smile he gave me was brilliant, transforming his face from severe beauty to something almost boyish. He took my hand and led me from the library, up the stairs to his private wing. His bedroom was familiar from my years of cleaning it, but entering it now as his guest rather than his employee felt different, sacred, somehow. I need to tell you something, he said once we were inside, his expression turning serious. About what happened with Marco. I tensed, not sure I wanted to hear this but knowing I needed to. I sent men to find him. They brought him back 2 nights ago. We talked. The pause before talked told me exactly what kind of conversation it had been. Is he dead? No. Though he probably wishes he was. Dante's jaw tightened. He told me things about Bianca, about their affair. It had been going on for 3 years. 3 years, Julian, right under my nose. The pain in his voice made me want to gather him close, to comfort him the way he'd been comforted that first night. But I sensed he needed to finish this confession first. He also told me something else. Something that made me realize how blind I'd been. Dante moved to the window, looking out at the darkened grounds. He said Bianca used to laugh about me. About how I was always working, always focused on the business, never paying attention to her. She called me cold, distant. Said I was more married to the family than to her. That's not true, I said fiercely. You're not cold. Aren't I? He turned back to me. I built an empire, Julian. But I forgot to build a life. I was so focused on being the Don, on living up to my father's legacy, on proving myself strong enough to lead, that I forgot how to be human. How to feel. How to connect. His voice dropped. Until you. My breath caught. You didn't try to fix me or change me, he continued. You saw me at my worst, drunk, broken, betrayed, and you just stayed. You held me together without asking for anything in return. You accepted the darkness in me without trying to turn it into light. And somehow, that made me want to be better. Not because you demanded it, but because you deserved it. I crossed the room to him, taking his hands in mine. I don't need you to be better, Dante. I need you to be real. That's all I've ever wanted, the real man, not the mask he shows the world. Even if the real man is capable of terrible things. Especially then. I squeezed his hands. I'm not naive about who you are or what you do. I've lived in this house for 10 years. I know what happens in your study during those late-night meetings. I know why alphas come to you afraid and leave either relieved or terrified. I know about the violence and the power and the blood. And it doesn't frighten you? It does, I admit it. But what frightens me more is the thought of living another 10 years invisibly, never taking risks, never really living. I spent my whole life playing it safe, and where did it get me? To a small room, alone, with nothing but regrets. I looked up at him. I don't want to be safe anymore, Dante. I want to be alive. Even if being alive means being afraid sometimes. He pulled me against him, his arms wrapping around me so tightly I could barely breathe. You're the bravest person I've ever met. I'm not. I'm terrified. That's what makes it brave. Doing it anyway. We stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the darkness, both of us understanding that we were standing on the precipice of something that would change us both forever. Finally, Dante pulled back just enough to look down at me. Last chance to change your mind. Once we crossed this line. I silenced him with a kiss, pouring everything I felt into it, all my fear, my desire, my desperate hope that this impossible thing between us might somehow work. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, I looked up at him with steady eyes. I already crossed the line the moment I lay down beside you that first night. Everything since then has just been admitting it. His smile was slow, full of promise and heat. Then let's stop pretending. What happened next was not the desperate coupling I'd imagined in my secret fantasies. It was slow, reverent, Dante treating my body like something precious he'd been entrusted to protect. He learned every curve, every sensitive spot, every place that made me gasp or sigh or call his name. And through it all, his alpha scent wrapped around me, that intoxicating whiskey and power and something deeper, something that felt like home. When he finally moved inside me, the sensation was overwhelming, not just physically, but emotionally. I felt the bond beginning to form, that deep alpha-omega connection that I'd always been told was a myth, something from romance novels and old stories. But it was real. I could feel him in my mind, in my bones, in every cell of my body. Julian, he gasped, his forehead pressed to mine. I can feel. I know, I managed. I feel it too. Afterward, lying in his arms with moonlight streaming through the windows, I felt something settle in my chest, a rightness, a sense of belonging that had nothing to do with possession and everything to do with choice. "I love you," Dante whispered against my hair. "I don't know when it happened or how, but I love you." The words should have terrified me. Instead, they felt like coming home. "I love you too," I whispered back. "God help us both." His laugh was quiet, tinged with understanding. "God stopped helping me a long time ago, Tesoro. But maybe you're my redemption. Or maybe we're each other's damnation," I suggested, only half joking. "Even better." He pulled me closer. "At least we'll burn together." The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of transition. Bianca formally moved out, taking nothing but her personal belongings and leaving behind any pretense that their marriage had ever been real. The divorce papers were filed, uncontested, with terms so generous that even Tony seemed surprised when Dante signed them without argument. "I don't want her money," Dante explained when I questioned his decision to let her keep everything. "I want her gone. And if writing a check makes that happen faster, it's worth it." My new position as household manager became official, complete with an office in the main house and a staff that reported directly to me. The change in power dynamics was immediate and uncomfortable. People who'd once been my equals now deferred to me, seeking my approval for decisions they'd previously made independently. Rosa was the only one who treated me the same, though even he kept his warnings about Dante to himself now. "Just be careful, Julian," he'd said once, squeezing my hand. "And remember, if you ever need help, I'm here." The East Wing apartment that became my new home was beautiful in a way that still made me uncomfortable: high ceilings, expensive furnishings, a view of the gardens that took my breath away every morning. It was more luxury than I'd experienced in my entire life, and some mornings I woke up expecting to find myself back in my small room in the staff quarters, the whole thing revealed as an impossible dream. But then Dante would appear at my door, coffee in hand, that soft smile reserved only for me transforming his usually severe features, and I'd remember this was real. We were real. Something else was real too. Something I'd been trying to ignore for the past 2 weeks. I woke one morning with a wave of nausea so intense I barely made it to the bathroom. For several minutes, I knelt on the cold tile, heaving into the toilet, my body racked with tremors. When I finally managed to stand, I caught my reflection in the mirror and saw the truth written in my pale face, my dilated pupils, the way my hand instinctively went to my stomach. No. It can't be. But I knew. I'd known for days, really, the nausea, the exhaustion, the way my scent had changed subtly, become softer, sweeter. The way my omega instincts had become more pronounced, more protective, more territorial. The way I'd started nesting without even realizing it, rearranging the pillows on the bed into a particular configuration that felt right. I was pregnant. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I sank onto the edge of the bathtub, my hands shaking, my mind racing through the implications. An unbonded omega carrying an alpha's child. Dante's child. The child of the most powerful alpha in the city. I didn't know how he'd react. We'd never discussed children. We'd barely discussed the future beyond the immediate present. And now. Julian? His voice came from the bedroom, concerned. I heard him moving, felt the bond between us pulse with worry. In here, I managed, my voice hoarse. He appeared in the bathroom doorway, his eyes immediately finding me on the edge of the tub. What's wrong? I felt. He stopped, his nostrils flaring as his alpha instincts picked up something in my scent. His eyes widened. You can smell it, I said quietly. Can't you? He crossed the room in 2 strides, kneeling in front of me, his hands coming up to frame my face. Julian. Tell me. I took a shaky breath. I'm pregnant. I'm sure. I've been feeling sick for days, and my scent is different, and... I didn't get to finish the sentence. He pulled me into his arms, crushing me against his chest, his face buried in my hair. I felt his body trembling, felt the storm of emotions that flooded through the bond, fear, joy, protectiveness, and something so fierce and overwhelming it took my breath away. "A baby," he whispered, his voice rough. "Our baby. Are you?" I pulled back just enough to look at him. "Are you happy about this?" He stared at me like I'd asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Happy? Julian, he laughed, a sound of pure disbelief. "I never thought I'd have this. Never thought I'd want it. But with you," his hand came up to rest on my stomach, so gently, as if I were made of glass. "With you, I want everything. I want a family. I want a life. I want to watch our child grow up and be better than I ever was." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I was smiling. "You're not going to be a terrible father, you know. I'm going to try not to be." He kissed me, soft and reverent. "That's all I can promise." "Then I'll take it." I rested my forehead against his. "We're going to be parents. We're going to be parents," he repeated, and the wonder in his voice made my heart ache. "I'm going to marry you, Julian. As soon as the divorce is final. I'm going to marry you and mark you and make you mine in every way that matters." "That's a lot of promises," I murmured, but I was smiling. "Consider them threats." He kissed me again. "I love you. I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving it." The threat we'd been expecting materialized on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in my office reviewing the household accounts when Luca appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. "Julian. We have a situation. Dante needs you in the study. Now." The urgency in his voice sent ice through my veins. I followed him through the house, my heart pounding as various scenarios played through my mind, an attack, an ambush. Someone had come for Dante. The study was crowded with men I recognized as Dante's inner circle. They all turned as I entered, their expressions ranging from concern to calculation. But I only saw Dante, standing behind his desk with a piece of paper clutched in his hand, his face carved from stone. "What is it?" I asked, moving to his side. He handed me the paper without speaking. It was a photograph, grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but unmistakable. It showed Dante and me in the garden 3 nights ago, his arms around me, my face tilted up to his as we kissed. Below the photograph, 3 words in rough block letters, "We know everything." "When did this arrive?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "An hour ago," Luca answered. "Hand-delivered to the front gate by a kid who said an alpha paid him $20 to drop it off. We've got people tracking him down now, but it's the Bratva. It has to be. This is exactly their style, psychological warfare before the real attack. The Bratva. The Russian Mafia." Dante had mentioned them before in the context of ongoing territorial disputes and occasional skirmishes for control of certain operations. But I'd never imagined they'd use me as a weapon against him. "So what do we do?" I asked. Every alpha in the room looked at me with varying degrees of surprise, as if they hadn't expected me to ask that question, as if they'd expected me to panic or fall apart or demand to be hidden away somewhere safe. Dante's expression softened slightly as he turned to me. "We protect you. That's priority 1. You'll have guards." "That's not what I asked." I took the photograph from him, studying it with a calmness I didn't feel. "I asked what we do. Not what you do to protect me. What we do as a team." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, pride, maybe a little fear. "Julian. They're using me against you," I continued, looking around the room at these alphas who'd spent years in Dante's service. They think I'm a weakness, a pressure point they can exploit. So we use that. We let them think they're right, and we turn their own strategy against them. Luca's eyebrows rose. You're suggesting we bait them? I'm suggesting we stop letting them dictate the terms of engagement. I looked at Dante. You told me once that you're always 3 moves ahead of your enemies. So be 3 moves ahead of this one. The silence in the room was profound. Then Dante laughed, a real laugh that held genuine amusement and something that sounded almost like joy. You know what? He pulled me against his side, his hand coming to rest protectively on my stomach. You're absolutely right. Gentlemen, it appears we have a strategist in our midst. What followed was 3 hours of intense planning. I listened as Dante and his men outlined the current situation with the Bratva, territorial disputes in Brighton Beach, conflicts over shipping routes, a recent incident where one of the Morelli operations had interfered with a Russian money laundering scheme. They've been looking for an opening to strike, Dante explained. Something that would hurt us publicly, embarrass us, make us look weak. A relationship between me and my former Omega Maid, an unbonded Omega with no family, no protection, no connections, that's exactly the kind of target they'd go after. So we give them what they want, I said, the plan forming as I spoke. We make me visible. Very visible. I attend events with you, appear in public, make myself an obvious target. And when they make their move, we're ready. Luca finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. Christ, that's risky. It's also smart. Dante said, though his expression was troubled. But Julian, you understand what you're volunteering for. You'd be walking around with a target on your back. And now, with the baby. I already have a target on my back, I countered. This photograph proves that. At least this way, I'm controlling the situation rather than just reacting to it. And the baby, I placed my hand on my stomach. The baby is why we have to end this. I'm not going to raise a child in the middle of a war. We argued for another hour, Dante trying to find ways to minimize my risk, me insisting that half measures wouldn't work. In the end, we compromised on a plan that put me in the public eye while surrounding me with invisible protection. The following week, I attended my first public event as Dante's acknowledged partner. The charity gala was held at one of Manhattan's most prestigious hotels, attended by the city's elite, politicians, business leaders, socialites, and inevitably members of various criminal organizations who'd learned to hide in plain sight among respectable society. I wore a suit Dante had chosen, deep emerald silk that transformed me into someone I barely recognized. His father's diamond cufflinks glittered at my wrists, a deliberate statement of acceptance and claiming. And on my arm, Dante himself, devastating in a tailored tuxedo, his hand possessive at the small of my back. You're beautiful, he murmured as we entered the ballroom. And terrified, I admitted. Try to breathe, tesoro. Easy for you to say. You're used to this world. And you're stronger than you think. He pressed a kiss to my temple, a public display of affection that caused ripples through the crowd. Just stay close to me. And remember, Marco, Gio, and 3 others are scattered throughout the room. You're safe. I wasn't sure I believed that, but I nodded anyway. The evening passed in a blur of introductions and careful conversations. Alphas who'd never noticed me during my years of invisible service now studied me with calculation, trying to determine who I was and what I meant to Dante Morelli. Some were kind, welcoming me with genuine warmth. Others were coldly assessing, clearly viewing me as an interloper who'd somehow seduced their way into a position of power. And then there were the Russians. I felt them before I saw them, a shift in the energy of the room, a sudden tension that made the guards scattered throughout the space go on alert. Dante's hand tightened on my waist as a group of alphas approached, led by someone I recognized from photographs Luca had shown me during our planning sessions. Mikhail Volkov, head of the Bratva's New York operations. An alpha whose scent was all smoke and cheap vodka and something darker, something that made my Omega instincts scream danger. Enjoying the party? Volkov's voice was pleasant, but his eyes were cold. Always. Dante's tone was equally pleasant, but his body coiled like a spring. Volkov. I don't recall seeing your name on the guest list. Last-minute addition. Volkov's eyes slid to me, dark and calculating. Thought I should come meet your new companion. Julian, yes. The Omega housekeeper. The emphasis on my former position was deliberate, designed to embarrass and diminish. I felt heat rise to my cheeks but forced myself to meet his gaze steadily. Former housekeeper, I corrected. Currently household manager for all Morelli properties. I held out my hand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Volkov. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, maybe, that I hadn't cowered or looked away. He took my hand, and I felt his alpha pheromones wash over me, a deliberate attempt to intimidate. But I'd been around powerful alphas my whole life. I knew how to resist. Very pretty, he said to Dante, as if I wasn't standing right there. But you know what they say, the higher they rise, the farther they fall. Is that a threat? Dante's voice dropped several degrees, becoming the cold, dangerous tone I'd only heard him use a handful of times. Merely an observation. Volkov smiled, showing too many teeth. Accidents happen all the time in this city. To everyone. Even to those we think are protected. The implication hung in the air between them, a clear threat to me, barely veiled behind polite words. I felt Dante's entire body tense, felt the violence gathering beneath his civilized exterior, and knew that if I didn't intervene, this elegant charity gala was about to become a bloodbath. Mr. Volkov. I stepped slightly forward, placing my hand on Dante's chest in a gesture that was both calming and possessive. I appreciate your concern for my safety. But I assure you, I'm exactly where I want to be. And I'm not afraid of heights. The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone present. I was telling him I understood the threat, acknowledged the danger, and was choosing to stand my ground anyway. Volkov studied me for a long moment. His alpha scent shifted, something like grudging respect flickering in his eyes. Then he laughed, a genuine sound of surprise. You have spirit, little Omega. I respect that. He turned back to Dante. Enjoy your evening, Morelli. I'm sure we'll be seeing each other again soon. As he walked away, taking his men with him, I felt Dante's tension gradually ease. His hand on my waist shifted from protective grip to gentle caress. That was incredibly stupid, he murmured in my ear. And incredibly brave. Was it enough? I asked quietly. Did we draw them out? Oh, we drew them out. Luca appeared at Dante's other side, his phone in his hand. Marco just sent word. 2 of Volkov's men were seen photographing the exits and security positions. They're planning something. Good. Dante's smile was sharp, predatory. Then our trap is working. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but the encounter with Volkov had changed something. We'd moved from passive targets to active players, and while that brought its own dangers, it also brought a kind of terrible freedom. That night, lying in Dante's arms back at the house, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the enormity of what I'd gotten myself into. I'm in love with an alpha whose enemies want to kill me, I said to the darkness. And I'm carrying his child. That's insane. Completely insane. Dante agreed. Want to back out? No. Good. He pulled me closer. Because I meant what I said that first night. I protect what's mine. And you, Julian Cruz, are mine in every way that matters. Possessive much? When it comes to you? Absolutely. His hand traced patterns on my bare shoulder. After Bianca, I thought I was done with relationships. Done with trust. Done with allowing anyone close enough to hurt me. But then you lay down beside me that night, wearing my shirt like a declaration, and something in me shifted. Broke open. Let light in for the first time in years. I turned in his arms so I could see his face in the moonlight streaming through the windows. I love you. I shouldn't. It's too fast, too dangerous, too everything. But I do. I know. His smile was soft, tender. I loved you the moment you told me you stayed because you wanted to take care of me. That's when I knew you were different, that you saw the alpha beneath the dawn. We stayed like that, wrapped around each other, making silent promises neither of us was sure we could keep. Outside, the city sprawled beneath us, full of dangers and enemies and threats we couldn't always predict. But in this moment, in this bed, in this space we'd carved out for ourselves, we were safe. Or at least we pretended to be. The attack came 3 days later, exactly as predicted. I was leaving a late lunch with some of the household staff, a monthly tradition I'd maintained even after my promotion, when 2 black SUVs pulled up alongside our car. Gio, my driver and guard, immediately recognized the threat, accelerating hard and calling for backup. What followed was something out of an action movie, a high-speed chase through Manhattan streets, Gio expertly maneuvering through traffic while the SUVs pursued. My phone pressed to my ear as I gave Dante constant updates on our position. Stay down, Gio ordered as a bullet shattered the rear window. Reinforcements are 2 minutes out. But 2 minutes can be an eternity when someone's shooting at you. The crash, when it came, wasn't catastrophic, but it was enough to stop our car. I felt the impact, felt the airbag deploy, heard Gio cursing as he tried to restart the engine. And then the doors were being wrenched open, rough hands grabbing me, pulling me from the vehicle. I fought. Years of suppressed rage and fear and determination all came flooding out as I kicked, scratched, bit anything I could reach. I heard Gio shouting, heard the distinctive crack of gunfire, heard sirens in the distance growing closer. And then I heard Dante's voice, roaring with a fury that made everything else seem quiet by comparison. Get your fucking hands off him. What happened next is still somewhat blurred in my memory. I remember being released suddenly, stumbling back against the car. I remember Dante appearing, flanked by what seemed like an army of his men, all of them armed and deadly serious. I remember the Russian who'd been holding me backing away, hands raised, realizing too late that he'd walked into a trap. Because that's what it had been, a trap. Bait carefully laid to draw out our enemies and eliminate them in one decisive move. Within minutes, it was over. The Russians were subdued, disarmed, and being loaded into vehicles to be taken somewhere I didn't ask about. And Dante was there, his hands on my face, his eyes wild with a mixture of fear and fury and relief. Are you hurt? He demanded, his fingers gentle despite the violence of his tone. Did they hurt you? The baby. I'm fine. I managed, though I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. Dante, I'm fine. The baby's fine. He pulled me against him, his arms wrapping around me so tightly I could barely breathe, his face buried in my hair. His alpha scent was everywhere, whiskey and power and fear, so much fear, and I felt his whole body trembling. When I heard shots, he whispered, his voice raw. When I heard you were being fired at, I know. I held him just as tightly. But I'm okay. The plan worked. Fuck the plan. He pulled back just enough to look at me. I nearly lost you. For what? To prove a point. To draw out our enemies? It wasn't worth it. You're not worth the risk. Yes, I am. I cupped his face, forcing him to look at me. This is your world, Dante. This is the life you lead, the empire you've built. If I'm going to be part of it, truly part of it, not just someone you hide away to keep safe, then I need to be able to face it. All of it. Even the dangerous parts. Especially the dangerous parts. He stared at me for a long moment, something like awe crossing his features. Then he kissed me, right there in the middle of a crime scene with his men and arriving police officers as witnesses. A claiming. A promise. A declaration that superseded any words. When we finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. I love you. God help me, I love you more than anything. I love you too. Even though you're dangerous and possessive and completely impossible. Especially because I'm dangerous and possessive and completely impossible, he corrected with a small smile. The weeks that followed brought changes neither of us had anticipated. Volkov, recognizing that he'd been outmaneuvered and that continuing to target me would only result in more of his men being killed or captured, extended an offer of truce. Not peace. Alphas like Dante and Volkov would never truly be at peace, but a mutual agreement to leave each other's personal lives alone while they continued their territorial battles on more traditional grounds. Bianca's divorce was finalized with surprising speed, leaving Dante officially single for the first time in over a decade. Tony began quietly preparing paperwork for another kind of legal bond, one that Dante and I had discussed in quiet moments when the future seemed possible rather than merely aspirational. And I settled into my new role, not just as household manager but as Dante's partner in the truest sense. I attended meetings when my insight was needed, offered perspectives that his alphas didn't always consider, helped bridge the gap between the business world and the human cost of their decisions. My pregnancy became more visible, and with it, a new protectiveness from everyone in the household. Rosa fussed over me constantly. Even Luca, who'd always been distant, started checking in. But through it all, Dante was my anchor. Every night, he'd come to the East Wing apartment, or I'd go to his suite, and we'd spend hours just being together, talking, planning, dreaming about the future. I want to see our child grow up without the violence, he said one night, his hand resting on my now visible belly. I want to build something they can be proud of. Something that doesn't require blood and fear to sustain. You're already building it, I reminded him. Every day, you're making choices that put family first. That's what matters. Sometimes I think you're the only good thing I've ever done. That's not true. You've done plenty of good things. You just don't see them because you're too busy being the Don. He smiled, that soft smile that was just for me. Is that your professional opinion as household manager? It's my professional opinion as the Omega who's going to be your husband. I leaned in and kissed him. Now stop worrying and come to bed. 6 months after that first night when I'd found him broken in his library, Dante took me back to that same room, the space where everything had changed, where I'd stopped being invisible and started being seen. I have something for you, he said, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. My heart stuttered. Dante. Let me finish. He opened the box to reveal a ring, not ostentatious, not flashy, but beautiful in its simplicity. A single diamond set in platinum, elegant and understated. I know it's fast. I know people will say we're rushing, that you're too young, that I'm too dangerous, that this will never work. But I don't care what people say. I care about you. About us. About the life we're building together. He took my hand, his eyes never leaving mine. Julian Cruz. You saw me at my worst and stayed. You accepted my darkness without trying to turn it into light. You walked into danger to protect what we were building. You're the bravest, strongest, most stubborn Omega I've ever met. And I want to spend the rest of my life standing beside you in whatever darkness comes. Tears were streaming down my face now, but I was smiling. That's the most terrifying proposal I've ever heard. Is that a yes? That's a yes. He slipped the ring onto my finger, then pulled me into his arms, kissing me with a tenderness that belied the dangerous alpha everyone else saw. And in that moment, in that library where everything had begun, I finally understood what Rosa had been trying to warn me about. He'd been right that alphas like Dante possessed and owned and consumed. But what he hadn't understood was that sometimes, being consumed by someone who truly saw you was better than being ignored by the entire world. I'd spent 10 years being invisible. Being safe. Being careful. And where had it gotten me? To a small room and a life half-lived. Now I was visible. I was loved. I was carrying the child of the most powerful alpha in the city. And I was living fully, completely, without reservation. I was loved by an alpha who'd shown me his demons and asked me to stay anyway, and I'd found a home, not in a place, but in the arms of someone who saw my darkness and called it beautiful. It wasn't the fairy tale I'd once dreamed of as a young Omega in Barcelona. But it was real, and honest, and ours. And in the end, that was enough. The bonding ceremony was small, just family and close friends, the people who'd supported us through everything. Dante's mother flew in from Italy, his eyes shining with tears as he embraced me for the first time. Rosa stood at my side, his hand squeezing mine. Luca officiated, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. And when Dante bit down on the bonding gland at the junction of my neck and shoulder, I felt the bond snap into place, a permanent connection that went beyond scent and pheromones and physical attraction. He was mine. I was his. We were one. I love you, he whispered against my skin. For always. Always, I agreed. And when our child was born 9 months later, a perfect little alpha boy with his father's amber eyes and my grandfather's stubborn streak, I looked at Dante holding our son for the first time and knew that everything we'd been through had been worth it. His name is Matteo, Dante said, his voice thick with emotion. After your grandfather? I nodded, tears streaming down my face. After my grandfather. The man who taught me what it meant to be strong even when you're afraid. Dante looked at me, his eyes shining. Thank you. For everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For staying when I was broken. For giving me this. I reached out and touched his face. You gave me the same thing. You saw me. You stayed. And now we have everything. He kissed me then, firm and tender, our son cradled between us. And in that moment, surrounded by family and hope and the future we'd built together, I knew that this was exactly where I was meant to be. Not invisible. Not safe. But truly, completely alive. The end.